you go. All right, so we're officially rolling. All right, very good. Teresa, as I mentioned, has Munsee, Mohican, Lenape heritage and has ancestral ties to the natives that live in the Dobbs Ferry area, according to her account. She presented to the students, touched a little bit on what she mentioned when she was visiting with those seventh graders last year. She basically spoke about what it was like to grow up as a native person in Canada. Fortunately for her, she did not attend the residential schools, which were these government-sponsored schools that really sought to eradicate native culture and language from native students. But she did tell some pretty horrendous stories, things that happened to cousins of hers, relatives of hers at these residential schools, some of the abuse and really negative things that were happening. And that was going on not just in Canada, but in the US as well. On a brighter note, she passed around some artifacts she has in her possession, a sacred tobacco pouch that has been passed down through her family, a war club that her father-in-law made about 50 years ago. So that's more of a replica piece, but still made by a native person. Drumsticks that are really interesting. They would have been used in the big house ceremony, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That was like the Thanksgiving ceremony that Lenape and Munsee would have been celebrating around this time of year, a Thanksgiving ceremony of their own. Tomahawk head and some artifacts that actually possibly members of Focus, some people from the Dobbs Ferry area had given to Teresa on one of her visits, and she ended the basically her presentation to the students by telling a very interesting story of how some ladies from the Dobbs Ferry area gave her some artifacts. She didn't mention what they were. I don't know if they were sacred pipes or projectile points. She put those artifacts in the pouch, I believe in that tobacco pouch, and slept on it, put it under her pillow, and said, asked the question, why was I given these artifacts? And she reported that she had a dream. She didn't really clarify if it was ancestors of hers or some Lenape spirits, but she had a dream where she was directed to speak about her roots, to spread the story of her people, to go across the country and interact with school kids, and basically relay her tale and the story of the Lenape and the Munsee that used to live in this area. I found that very interesting. And one last thing that she mentioned, which I thought was pretty funny, is she said one of the children in the group asked her what was her fondest memory growing up or being Lenape, and she said playing Lenape football, which apparently it's a type of ball game where there are goalposts, women are on one team, men are on the other, and the men can't use their hands. The women can use their hands, their legs, and the men can't roughhouse or physically touch the women. And basically, opposing sides are trying to get the ball to either end of the field. And she said there was no shortage of laughs as they play that game. And she wanted to mention that it taught younger members of the community respect for their elders and for women in general. So one thing I'll mention, just to give this a little bit more specific context, one of her ancestors was Tediascum. He was a Lenape chief from basically the Trenton, New Jersey area, and he became known as King of the Delawares. He was representing the Lenape, the Munsee natives of the lower Hudson Valley in the Treaty of Easton in 1758. This was basically a treaty. The Lenape were trying to get a permanent homeland in eastern Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, he failed in those efforts, not no fault of his own. The Iroquois, the Six Nations, are actually kind of working against the Lenape, and the Lenape were unable to secure that homeland in eastern Pennsylvania. So they basically got evicted from the New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania area, and were forced further west. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I've been mentioning the Munsee, the Lenape. it's a little bit confusing. It's hard. It's hard to really get a really specific grasp on this because scholars kind of have different opinions the more you look into this. But basically, the Munsee, this whole area here could be considered Lenape territory. But it's important to remember the Lenape were not like a nation in the sense that we think of today. They were different clans, different units, different tribes almost, that essentially were very loosely banded together, and perhaps in times of war, they might make alliances with each other, or they may have trade agreements, but they were almost these, the different groups were almost like these, if you use a more modern equivalent, like their own kind of individual political entities. They were very much based around what I understand, family ties, family groups, clans that lived in different areas. So Lenape is a very loose term, and Munsee really just refers to the language that was spoken in this area, the dialect. And that was the common element that these different bands or tribes or whatever term you use shared. So the Tapan, the Wikwasaki in our area here, Dobbs Ferry, the Sing Sing, which would have been up in Ossining, the Notchpm a little bit further north. So it's important to remember these are really their own kind of independent entities, these clans or groups. They do have agreements and they do band together, they do intermarry, but it's not as cohesive as essentially as people may think. So Munsee actually means people from Minisink. What I've been able to determine, Minisink Island is an island in the upper Delaware River. Apparently the term means at the island. And Munsee's become a broad category that some scholars, not all, use to describe the different native groups of the lower Hudson Valley. We'll use it today in that sense, but it's important to remember that it is kind of an area of debate. Now, one of the Munsee chiefs, the Eastern Pennsylvania, was Chief Laffer Winston. The reason I have this image here is just to give you a sense of what the natives may have looked like. This is the earliest known portrait of a Lenape chief, painted in 1735 by a Swedish painter. And again, Chief Laffer Winston and his people were Munsee. And his people from the island or at the island in this area. Just to give you a sense of what they may have looked like. All right, now we're going to whittle this down to the Wikwasaki. And I want to give a shout out to Fred Charles, who's in the audience. He's been very instrumental. He's a member of Focus and Revolutionary Hastings, a bulwark of local history. I would say he's done amazing stuff to support local history in the area, and he helped connect me with the Lenape woman who actually lives out in Wisconsin, a lady who is part of the Mohican Munsee band of natives in the Wisconsin area. And there are Munsee speakers there, and she suggested that I spoke to one of the Munsee there, and she said that she believes that the Wikwasaki, there's as many different pronunciations as there are spellings probably out there. It's been very tricky, but she believes this is the most accurate. Wikwasaki, referring to the natives that lived in this area. So that's the term we'll use today. And their territory, again, this is up for debate. A lot of what we're going off of are land deeds from the 1600s with the Dutch. It gets kind of muddled, it gets confusing. There's also 19th century historians interpreting these land deeds, and their opinions differ. So two of the 19th century scholars of Native American history, one of them is named E.M. Rutenberg. He's a newspaper man out of Newburgh, and a historian, a president of the Newburgh Historical Society, again, in the late 1800s. He has a different opinion of where the territory of the Wikwasaki would have been, but this This territory here is based on what Reginald Pelham Bolton, yet another native historian, researcher in the 1800s who was doing a lot of digging on northern Manhattan, dug a lot of native sites. We call him a relic hunter. He also dug a lot of Revolutionary War sites. From his understanding and research, he thought this was basically the territory of Waquasequi. But Rutenberg, the Newberg researcher historian, believed the territory would have been more like this. What I can say is, looking at deeds and some of the primary documents from the 1600s, it's not exactly clear, because you have people that are listed as Waquasequi chiefs or sachems selling land in this area, but you also have the same Waquasequi sachems selling land in this area and this area. So it's hard to say what exactly is going on. Are they selling? Were they kind of elected by other tribes or groups to help with these land sales? There were land agreements, or were they actually, is that part of their territory? So I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if anybody is at this point, but so there's different opinions out there. So anyway, this is the oldest map. Now we know of a Dutch map made by Nicholas Fisher in 1656 that actually shows Waquasequi in the area of Dobbs Ferry. Yeah, you can see it here. It's a little bit less clear there. And it's pretty cool to see that their name on a map from this time period. So apparently, according to a 17th century Dutch account, there were three major settlement sites or castles of the Waquasequi. One would have been right here in the Dobbs Ferry area. Another one would have been further north in the Tarrytown area. That was known as Alapunk. And then there's disagreement among scholars, but the third may have been at the mouth of the Sawmill River in Yonkers, although other researchers say that that was part of the Wawank tribe or group, and that may not have been Waquasequi territory. So again, there's a little bit of disagreement. So some of you maybe have this shirt, or you've seen it before, just to muddle the waters a little bit more. In addition to Waquasequi, we have Wisquaqua. Sorry, I'm trying my best with the pronunciation. It's Wisquaqua. And some researchers think that means place of the bark kettle. Again, others disagree and have different interpretations. I think the takeaway is no one knows for sure, but there are a few different possibilities. Now, Wisquaqua, they also refer to Wickers Creek itself. It's unclear if it's referring to the location that's now Dobbs Ferry or the actual creek itself. And what exactly is a bark kettle anyway? Well, believe it or not, the natives did use containers made out of bark, and they could even cook in them, which seems hard to believe. They would just burn up. But if there's liquid in here, you can have this over a fire, or you could actually heat up rocks, put your rocks in a container, and cook that way, rock boiling. It is documented that containers like this were used for boiling off maple sap in the spring. In the early spring, when you have to evaporate sap to get increase the sugar content, and they end up with maple syrup. Now, Bolton, the historian, 19th century historian I mentioned earlier, believed that Wisquaqua or Wecquisquac did not mean place of the bark kettle, but meant a boundary near principal land. Now, we don't know if that's for sure or not, but that was his interpretation. The last thing I will say about place of the bark kettle, which is pretty interesting, there was an ethnoarchaeologist named Catherine Walters, a member of Focus. I don't know if she's still around or still living. She had done research back in the 80s and the early 90s, and she suggested that there also, or put out the possibility that if indeed Wisquaqua in place of the bark kettle, it may have been referring to this interesting Lenape folklore of a serpent or a snake, a horned serpent that was a creature that was very much, or a spirit that was very much feared by the local natives. And they would put offerings in a bark kettle or container and put it in a hole in the ground and bury it as an offering to hopefully keep the serpent at bay, to placate that entity or deity or whatever it was. This is actually an original 1731 carving from Delaware area of that deity, the horned serpent. This is from 1731. Apparently, it was carved in a door of Delaware house. All right, so what would the village of Wequassackie would have looked? What might it have looked like? Well, has anyone here been to the new exhibit at Phillips Manor Hall in Yonkers? Fantastic exhibit on the Muncie down there. Great model. This is where these photos are from. If you're interested and you haven't visited, definitely check out the newly revived and renovated Phillips Manor Hall. Fantastic new exhibits there. A lot of programming, a lot of energy there right now, and in downtown Yonkers. And anyhow, they had this diorama, and according to the 17th century accounts, the Dutch accounts, or the English accounts I looked at, this seems pretty accurate. It seems like it may actually be based on Adrian van der Donk, who was founder of Yonkers, a young man who was a lawyer, very intelligent, bright guy that bought the original land tract that would later become Yonkers. Anyhow, what we see here, we imagine this is the Hudson River, and imagine this might be Wickers Creek. And I'm going to read some of the 17th century accounts. You can see how maybe it lines up with this this model we have here. Just give me 1 second. All right, so this is written by in 1650 by Secretary of New Netherland, Cornelius van Tienhoven. No idea if I'm pronouncing that Dutch right, probably not. But Witwatersrand on the North River, 20 miles above New Amsterdam, is a right good and suitable land for cultivation. It contains considerable maize lands. You can see the corn drawn here, the Three Sisters, which the Indians planted rising from the shore. In the interior, the country is flat and mostly even, very abundantly watered, with small streams as running fountains. We have our stream over there. Then we have a 1670 account by an Englishman named Daniel Denton. It seems to corroborate what Van Tienhoven says. He says they built small movable tents, which they removed to 2 or 3 times a year, having their principal quarters where they plant their corn, their hunting quarters, and their fishing quarters. So their principal quarters being near where they plant their corn, their hunting quarters, and their fishing quarters. And we're going to get into more of this in a little bit. Where the actual village of Wisquaqua may have been located. Finally, New York State archaeologist William Ritchie in 1962 wrote, in the lower Hudson Valley during the late woodland and contact periods, Native American planting fields and small temporary camps were located near main villages. So we can see the planting fields, the area. Now, the question that comes up in my mind, and probably a lot of your minds, is, okay, well, where exactly was the actual village site? And from the archaeological reports I've seen, and there may be other ones that I haven't, but the area that's known as the landing, that townhouse development, A lot of artifacts were found there, a lot of interesting finds, a lot of very diagnostic finds, but there was no concrete evidence of there being an actual permanent village there. So, speaking to some other noted archaeologists, local archaeologists, Eugene Bosch, some of you might know of him, very good. Catherine Walters, who did a lot of research for Focus, the ethnoarchaeologist from New York City. They believe that that landing site here may have been more of a processing area, kind of a camp, a town dump, as Eugene Bosch puts it, where materia, oysters were processed, projectile points were made, processing of meat was going on, planting of corn, but that the actual village may have been a bit further up the hill, perhaps where Mercy College, now Mercy University, is actually located today. We're going to get into a little bit more of the archaeology, but that's their understanding. I'll show you this. So this is Eugene Bosch, it's a quote from him describing that. So basically, we're down here in Dobbs Ferry, the library, the Wickers Creek site. It's just the archaeological site, which some archaeologists call it the Mount Mercy site. It's basically right in this area. This is the only area where extensive archaeology was done that I'm aware of. And Mercy University, formerly Mercy College, is right up the hill. So it's possible that the actual village location was more in this area. And give me a chance to read this. I don't know, people say when you're doing PowerPoints, you shouldn't read out loud the text. The audience will read it way before you finish reading it. Maybe I'll heed that advice. Unless there's people in the back that their eyesight prevents them. Is there anybody that can't read the text? Okay, we'll take that as enough. The other intriguing thing, and I'm going to read an account now by Adrian Vanderdonk, again, just to confuse the waters a little bit more. And I'm not doing this intentionally, it's just that looking at all the information, you have to consider all the different possibilities. There may have also been winter encampments or castles, these extra fortified areas, literally made out of these wooden palisades, imagine logs stuck into the ground, maybe about 10 feet high. A fortified area, a circular fortified area that the natives could retreat to in the winter time or when they're under attack. So it's possible that they were kind of more seasonally occupying the area of the Wickers Creek site proper, and then in the winter time retreating further inland. Although it's possible, like we said, that the main village may have been right here, or maybe right down in downtown Dobbs Ferry. Maybe these are just kind of winter camps. We don't know for sure how far inland these winter cantonments may have been. Here's the account by Adrian Vanderdonk from 1655. Again, the founder of Yonkers. He wrote a great book. Anybody's interested, some of you are going through it. Description of New Netherlands. He wrote this in 1655, talking about his impressions, what he observed, what he saw. Very detailed writer, a good naturalist. Pretty interesting account. So he writes in reference to the local natives, the lower Hudson Valley natives. They have other settlements that line the open and manner of villages and often have the woods on one side and their cornfields on the other. They have also settlements at certain places near water where they are in the habit to do much fishing every year and at the same time plant some crops. Those places they leave toward winter, when they remove to the castles or dense woods where it is warm and firewood is close at hand. But he's suggesting in the warmer weather, they're more by the coast, more by the Hudson River, more in areas like you would find to see at Wickers Creek, those types of settlements or processing areas. There as well, no wind So, and then when they remove to the castles or dense woods where it is warm and firewood is close at hand, there as well no wind can trouble them. So if there were winter encampments, maybe they're moving east to get out of the west or the cold northwesterly wind that come in the winter. There as well, no wind can trouble them, and they have good opportunity for hunting, by which they nourish themselves in place of fishing. It's interesting to think of this kind of seasonal diet change in the spring and summer. You're doing more fishing, and into the fall as well, which we're going to get into in a little bit. But then in the fall into winter, the diet changes much more to hunting, bear, venison, wildcats, things like that. They seldom abandon their castles and large settlements completely, but otherwise they easily pick up and move on. They seldom remain in one place and remain long in one place and follow the season and time of year. That is, in summer when the fishing is good, they move to the watersides and rivers. In fall and winter, when meat is best, they seek the woods. Sometimes, but mostly in spring, they travel in droves to the seashore to eat oysters and to stock up on all kinds of shellfish, which they know how to dry and preserve for a long time. Now, that makes a lot of sense, but we're going to get into the archaeology now, Wickers Creek, and some of the specific finds they present a slightly different picture of what Vanderdonk is presenting. But I think the general truth of it could be true, that in the wintertime, they're moving east, they're moving further inland, and whether they're moving in just a little bit to this area or all the way in here, that's up for debate. These sites that I have up there, by the way, there are actual areas where artifact hunters in the late 1800s and early 1900s actually found considerable concentrations of artifacts. One of these is Woodlands Lake, off the Sawmill Parkway, an area called Orlando Avenue, right near downtown Ardsley. And again, thank Fred Charles for sending me an interesting article. There were actual pretty impressive artifact concentrations in Hastings as well, just south of here. An area called Uniontown. There's a hill here called Funky Barry Hill. And there may have been, in the volume of artifacts, it's possible this was a village location as well. Was that a separate village location, or was that potentially the winter cantonment, the winter shelter of the Dobbs Ferry Wickers? We're not sure. These are all tantalizing questions. This is very much still a mystery. But I'll read you an interesting piece of local folklore. This is taken from an article done by Keith Doherty for the Hastings Historian just back in 2021. Really interesting article. Again, thank you to Fred for sending this article along. He writes, in the Uniontown area, an especially large number of items seem to have surfaced near the intersection of Farragut and Stanley Avenues. That's kind of where what was in the 19th century was the Charles Federn farm. So many items were apparently being churned up by the owner's plow at this time that a collector is supposed to visit in Hastings regularly from Manhattan to follow behind and pick up objects as they surface. It's impossible to say what this unnamed individual made off with, but it likely included stone tools and possibly pottery. In the 1920s, when that area would become Farragut Parkway, and was being excavated, further items apparently appeared in the shallow topsoil. Still more is said to have been found on and around the rocky slopes of Funky Barry Hill, including a number of stone axe heads. A naturalist and historian in the 1920s in Hastings, J. Otis Swift, wrote, and I have no idea what he's basing this on, but it's intriguing. There was a fortified citadel atop Funky Barry Hill. It's used by the Wickers to defend themselves against Mohawk raids in 1634. So a tantalizing clue, but again, what's his source? What is he basing this on? We don't know, unfortunately. maybe the fortified castle or winter retreat of Wickers was a little bit southeast of here. Maybe it was in Dobbs Ferry. Interesting to speculate. I'm going to read you one last piece of interesting folklore relating to that kind of connects the Dobbs Ferry, Wickers, and the Hastings Wickers settlement from this article. Another tale says that the cave so apparently there was a cave somewhere along the east side of Humphrey Hill that got destroyed, not there anymore. Another tale says that the cave was originally built up and inhabited by one Fengahek, the supposed founder of the Hastings Wickers group, who had eloped here from Dobbs Ferry with his young bride. The two came fleeing his bride's father, Rekwawak, the chief of the Dobbs Ferry Wickers. After Fengahek had welched on his dowry of half a canoe load of oysters. I have no idea if this is the figment of some 1920s gentleman's imagination, but it's intriguing to think. Well, at least we have a story, even if it's folklore, that's connecting Dobbs Ferry to Hastings. That's kind of cool. So I haven't really spoken much about oysters, but of course the Wickers Creek site is known for its shell beds, the extensive piles of discarded oysters that were found there. And I'm going to get a little bit into the archaeology now as we speak about oysters, but basically, and I see Bob Walters is in the crowd, and he may know a little bit more about this than I do. So if anything I'm saying about oysters is not right, just yell right out, correct me. But apparently there's a few different types of oysters in the Hudson. You have sand and bed oysters. So these are oysters, from what I understand, that are just in the silt and the muck of the bottom of the river. And then, but then you also have reef oysters, like what you see here. That actually grow on a reef. And apparently there were both types of oysters in the Hudson near Dobbs Ferry, somewhere near this area. Maybe Bob knows of some specific oyster reef locations. But basically, the sand oysters could be easily hand-picked at low tide or scooped up, whereas the reef oysters would probably require stone tools to remove and maybe even diving, as they could be deeper down, and the natives have to dive down to get them. Incidentally, unrelated, but I have to include this bit of information. Some of you have heard of the Billion Oyster Project in New York City, going back maybe the past 5, maybe even 10 years. There's an active effort to restore the oyster to New York City Harbor. Oyster really, New York City really was like the oyster capital of the U.S. for back in the 1800s, colonial times. And there's some promising information, or there's some promising developments. In 2018, the largest oyster in 100 years was found in New York City Harbor, measuring almost 9 inches long. Now, Adrian Vanderdonk reports finding foot-long oysters in 1650s in the area. 9 inches is pretty good. We're getting close, right? So, what does a shell midden actually look like? Well, here is a great diorama from the Pequot Museum in Mystic, Connecticut, dedicated to the Pequot natives in eastern Connecticut. You can see just this pile of oyster shells being discarded. And then photographed by Fred Charles, I believe. Is this Tom Morrison? It is, yeah. Tom Morrison is a key member of Focus. I'm sure a lot of you know him well. They moved out of the area recently. He was very instrumental also in providing information. But here they are looking at one of the middens in at the actual Wickers Creek archaeological site, the area that is now the landing development. I just wanted to give you a sense of what a shell midden was all about. But now we're going to get into the archaeology and we're going to discuss the oysters a little bit more. Basically, something that was confusing is when William Roberts, the archaeologist that conducted the survey of Greenhouse Consulting in 1987, was investigating Wickers Creek site before the development went in. They tested a number of the oysters. They found that around 50 or 60% had died in the fall. Maybe they were harvested in the fall. So this indicates that the main oyster season here at Wickers Creek, Dobbs Ferry area may have been the fall. There are some other interesting archaeological finds that kind of corroborate this. Hickory nuts, which drop in the fall. There were a lot of deer bones that were brought to the site. The archaeologists believe that deer were being hunted a little bit further inland and then quartered, butchered in a basic way, and then brought back to the Wickers Creek site for further processing. So that's a little bit different than what Adrian Vanderdok's reporting, with the spring and the summer being the main oyster season. But this is just the information I'm finding. So how do we square that? I don't know. I believe personally there was probably oysters. It's not like they didn't find any oysters being harvested in the spring and summer at Wickers Creek. It's just that at least half of them were being harvested in the fall. So it seemed like it was a year-round thing or a spring through fall thing, but the big season would have been right now, according to the archaeologists' findings. Just have this picture in to give you a little bit more of a sense of village life. This is actually from the New York State Museum. This is, I think, Lake Ontario. This is the diorama of Iroquois, but I think it really gives us a sense of what we pretend this is the Hudson River. It gives you a sense of what that location might have looked like back in the pre-contact time period. And again, I like to imagine that this could be Wickers Creek. This diorama is from the Pequot Museum, so unfortunately not of the Monsieur Lampe or the Weckwaskia, but I think it's probably very similar to what we would have seen going on. So I'm going to delve into the archaeology a little bit more. But this was the actual area of investigation. It was only an acre, and you can see why this could be an issue trying to get the larger picture. We don't know what was going on all in here. This is the area that Eugene both believes and Captain Walters believe could have been, the main village site. And I spoke to a member of Dobbs Ferry Historical Society who works at University. So this is an ongoing project. There is archaeology that's done there that has any kind of evidence of there being potentially a prosecuted village site there, but we want to know about it. So hopefully we can find out. But anyway, the area that was investigated in 1987 was just shy of an acre. It's really where the development is going in. Shown before kind of in this location. And you can see these are actual maps from their survey. The area, there were actually 3 phases of archaeology. The first area that was done by a gentleman named Edward Kaiser, president of the New York State Archaeological Association back in the 1970s. And 1978 through 1985, he had the permission, the Sisters of Mercy. So before Mercy College arrived, that property was essentially the property of nuns, Sisters of Mercy. Their compound was built in the 1950s. And again, when they built that compound, what artifacts were found? Was there any archaeology done? It doesn't seem like it, unfortunately. Anyway, Kaiser is basically digging in the northwest portion of the acre areas over here, and he has quite a few finds. He's digging about a quarter of the acre site, so a quarter acre area, and we'll look at what his finds were. Try to give some of the more interesting items that he found, and that were also found by William Roberts, greenhouse consulting, that was done in 1987. What we see on the left here, well, let me start. Anybody know what these could be? Oh, not arrowheads. Think bigger. Think bigger. What? Close. You're close. Not antelope. Has anybody ever heard of an axe? Or gouges? These are tools that would have been used to make boats, essentially dugout canoes. So it's interesting that we have evidence that they have woodworking tools there. Perhaps they were making dugout canoes at the Wickers Creek site. It makes sense. You're right by the Hudson River. They're definitely using these dugout canoes to get around. And the way the process works, you cut down a big tree with your stone axe to make it easier. Maybe you set a fire around the base of the tree, so you're really just chipping away at the char. The preferred tree, from what I understand, was the tulip tree, the yellow poplar, which has like a soft hardwood. Everybody's done working with that wood. And you burn out the area with hot coals, and then you come in with these axes and adzes and gouges and chip away the char. And I was gonna say you rinse, wash, and repeat, but that doesn't really work in this situation. You don't want to add water. You're just burning and charring, and then you keep digging, and you have different layers, and you make your way down. So that's pretty interesting. They also found, does anybody, this is not from Wickers Creek, but this is an authentic artifact, and we'll pass this around. This came from where here I work at Harlan State Park. Anybody know what this is? It's the same item that you see here. Give you a clue. It relates to the water and activities you might be doing with your dugout canoe once you've made it. Guesses? Fishnet sinker. You would have a bunch of these. All it is a rock where you'll see there's indentations on either side, and it's chipped away. You can connect your net, and you have a bunch. Say you have a long seine net, like a net maybe about this tall, and say it extends from here all the way to the wall there, or even longer, and you're using it to catch fish. And you want to weigh down the bottom of the net, and then maybe you use pieces of wood to float the top of the net. So we'll pass this around, but it's cool because it's evidence that there were fishing activities going on at the Wickers Creek site. And that's an actual dugout canoe. I think it's found in Hackensack, New Jersey. I think it's at the Museum of the American Indian, DC. Might be at the museum. I'm not 100% certain on where it is today, but pretty neat. So another interesting and unique find archaeologically that came from Wickers Creek, its own unique type of pottery. Wickers Creek has its own pottery line, Mount Mercy punctuated. They believe it dates roughly to about a little over 2,000 years old. It's pretty extensive. And it has this interesting decoration on it that may have been done by a reed, the end of a reed, like stamping it, give it that print design. It's pretty cool. Another interesting, unique find at Wickers Creek, limestone chert from the Midwest, from the Illinois River Valley. This is the only Hudson Valley site, from what I've read, where Midwest limestone chert has been found. So that suggests trade with bands or groups of natives further west of here. You know, this chert can be found in this area. It's made its way all the way over here to the Wickers Creek site here in Dobbs Ferry. Also found fragments of soapstone. A soapstone pot, not an intact pot, that's not the actual pot, but fragments. This pot was found in the Adirondacks, but they found fragments of a pot like this at the Wickers Creek site. And this is very ancient, 3,000 years old or older. And it's basically the first type of pottery. They call this the transition between what archaeologists call the Archaic period and the Woodland period. And as you go into the Woodland period, that's where the ceramic pottery starts showing up, like the Wickers Creek pottery that you see here. So some more stone tools found at the Wickers Creek site. This is a nutting stone. You can see a little depression here. So they found remains of hickory nuts, again indicating a fall occupation of the site. Hickory nuts can be put here and cracked with a hammerstone. This is one of the edible type of hickory nuts that we have in the area. I'll pass that around. That's called a mocker nut hickory. You also have the shagbark hickory, which would have been one of the edible hickory nuts. And what's interesting, the natives would crack these nuts. They would put them in these vats of water. They would simmer them, and you get this. The oil from the nuts would rise to the top, and they could scoop them up, or just strain all the liquid. Strain the nutshells, and you have this very rich, very nutritious nut broth, almost like a nut milk, but it's a little bit different. Then you have any guesses as to what this might have been used for? You got it, please. How the natives are hunting, how they're making their arrows. This is an arrow shaft abrader. At least that's what archaeologists believe. They take that wood and that stone and use it to sand and even out straight the shaft with an arrow. You have a drill bit here, drill bit saw here. You attach that to the end of a wooden spindle, something shorter than this and a little stouter, but literally a hand drill, or you could connect it to a boat drill, kind of like an apparatus with a bow, and actually drill holes in wood or bone or shell, or maybe things like waffle. And then these are nice plates here. Good plates. The type of rock, I'm getting ahead of myself. Quartzite is the most common type of lithic mountain, right? Like a white quartz, which is interesting. I'll show you a picture of that in a little bit. And here we have a private collector canvassed the site back in the 80s. This is one of the problems with the Wickers Creek site. Unfortunately, there's just been years of hunt hunting and people taking artifacts out of there. So it's hard, when an archaeological excavation happens, if that's been going on, it's hard to get the full snapshot of what was going on at the site. People were plucking artifacts out of there. Well, anyhow, this is either a bird or a fish effigy carved out of stone. There's an eye here, there's a mouse. And you have to use a little bit of imagination to figure it out, but a very interesting artifact nonetheless. The oldest artifacts found at Wickers Creek, around 8,000 years old, is what they call a bifurcate projectile points. This would have been a spear point, the arrow shaft going into this little groove that's why it's called bifurcated. And they found a single point that they date to around 8,000 years old. There were also fragments of Paleo-Indian points. This indicates a possible use of the site, or even just indigenous people passing through over 10,000 years ago. So one of the more intriguing finds made in 1987 by William Roberts was a series of post holes. Basically, you put a post in the ground, you go away for 2,000 years, or however long. When you come back and you dig it up, there's going to be a stain in the ground. It's going to be remnants. The dirt's going to have a different color, and archaeologists can tell that there was a structure there. So this is an intriguing structure here, where these are about a meter apart. These dots, so a meter this way, but then you see here there's something closer together. And William Roberts, a consultant archaeologist that did the work for the developer, believes that it was possibly a drying or smoking rack to preserve or dry the oysters that were being taken out of the Hudson in the area. Eugene Quosh thinks that that's a definite possibility, but he also suggests he found apparently a similar feature in Oberlin, New Jersey. That was actually a funerary platform. So basically what he found in New Jersey, there were burials under this, and there was a structure on top, I guess, to protect the burials. Maybe the burials were actually were like open air for a little bit. I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but it's interesting that he says it was a very similar structure. Now the big difference here is no bones were found associated with this structure. That being said, Eugene Bush says it is possible the acidity of the soil that any trace of bones may have dissolved over the course of thousands of years. Of course, this is speculation, but it's interesting to think of the different possibilities of what the structure could be. We don't know for sure, but those are some of the theories out.
How many human remains were in general on any of these sites? Or?
At the Wickers Creek site, the only thing I came across, and maybe members of the audience know more, is a nun, I believe, found a burial somewhere east, maybe even east of the Aqueduct Trail, so considerably further east of the actual archaeological site. But that's the only thing I heard of. But there were, and here and there you hear of discoveries in the 1800s and 1900s of people finding bones in their backyards, and they're believed to be native, kind of scattered throughout the area, but no major burial location. I mean, if anybody in the audience has a specific story or knows of something, please speak up. Yeah.
Old article from a newspaper, 1894. There was a discovery of a quantity of human bones on the hill in Oliphant Avenue, a couple of blocks from here, when they were digging the foundation for the Andrew C. Field estate. They were presumed to be Native American and were quickly reburied.
That was more than one.
A quantity instead of large quantity of human bones.
So that's it. See, that's that's the only thing that I've heard about. And again, the details are kind of sketchy on it. I'm not sure who that was, what was going on there. Courtesy of Eugene Bush, there was a great exhibit at the local town hall. You probably maybe even help put this together. But here you can see a post hole, which is kind of cool. A scraper, so this would have been used to scrape deer hides for processing deer skins with usable leather. Fragments of the shell nades, oyster shells, different stone tools, a nice assemblage. And then here, I mentioned that quartzite was the most common lithic found there. So this is a quartzite knife blade you can see here. Now this stone, unfortunately, when I asked Eugene Bush about it, he wasn't entirely sure. He thought it could be a nutting stone or used for fire making, but I don't know. It seems to me the number of holes in that, there's something more going on with it, but I don't know. But it's a very intriguing artifact. And the level of work, imagine drilling through rock, essentially with a harder rock, with like a hand drill or a bow drill. It's a lot of work to make all those holes. One of the things Teresa mentioned in her discussion with the students back is the big house ceremony. She had drumsticks that like this that her ancestors had made, and it's a really interesting ceremony that would happen this time of year. It was called gongling. Again, it was like the Lenape Muncie version of Thanksgiving. Their Thanksgiving ceremony, they would have this long deer hide drum. They have a series of deer skins attached together, and they would unfold it, and it would be a flat deer skin, and they would beat it with these type of flat drumsticks to make a certain type of percussion. And Teresa had sticks that I think were made maybe by her father-in-law or one of her ancestors for this big house ceremony. I don't know if the ceremony is still actively happening in Muncie Nation, but there was a revival of it back in the 1920s. I'll just read you some excerpts so you can get a sense of what it was all about. So basically, it was a way for the Muncie to say Wanishi or Unushi. That means thank you. And the eponymous big house in which the ceremony took place was accordingly to be built was built to be symbolic of the entire universe, which Lenape believed had been fashioned by creator God who made a giant turtle and then put a cedar tree in the center of its back from which returned man and woman sprouted. An oval dancing floor represented the back of the giant turtle. A central pole, represented the cedar tree at the center of the world. Within this house, participants during the 12 days of the ceremony moved through 12 layers of creation between earth and heaven, finally reaching the abode of the Creator on the final night. Men and women look for guidance and power from all the Manitowoc, which are, I guess, different deities, through dreams, visions, and prayer. During the sacred Big House ceremony, the ceremony featured selected individuals who recited poetic renditions of their religious visions. People prayed, danced, and sang sacred songs. Red cedar, which was considered sacred to the Lenape, was burned to purify the people in all things. Its smoke carried the prayers of the people up to the 12th heaven where the Creator lived. One individual was chosen by the village elders to represent the Masingwa, usually a shaman medicine man, put on a full bear costume with full fur and wore a face mask painted red on the right, black on the left. At this ceremony, the Lenape called the Masing and other Manitowoc to express thanksgiving for their blessings. The Mesing Okan brought the presence of the Masing into the big house. The Messing Olakan, I was the shaman kind of impersonating the Messing, could not speak during the ceremony, but used a turtle shell rattle and a stick to communicate his thoughts. This calling upon the Messingwa was done in hopes of bringing prosperity and good health to the people. The Manitowoc were believed to have powerful abilities, and the Big House ceremony was practiced by the Lenape, and thanks to the spirit forces, it was carried out to ensure the spiritual needs of the people. It's just an interesting glimpse into some of the culture of what might have been going on right around this time of year. The local Muncie, right, maybe right here at Wickers. Another thing that was interesting that was going on in the fall were burns, prescribed burns. Basically, the natives would set fire to the underbrush in areas to burn the leaves and the scrub lighter to keep an open area to encourage the growth, the undergrowth for blueberries and fruit bushes and things like that. And also this time of year, if anybody's a hunter, you know that dry leaves are the bane of your existence as you're trying to walk quietly through the woods. So they would burn the leaves too to make their hunting easier. And read you an account from Adrian Vanderdonk, pretty stunning account of what he witnessed in the 1650s in this time of year in that lower Hudson Valley. So why were they burning? The Indians are in the habit, and we Christians have also adopted it once a year in the fall to burn the woods, plains, and those marshlands that are not too wet as soon as the leaves have dropped and the herbage has withered. Sounds like this time of year. Portions that were missed, as may happen, get their turn later in the months of March and April. For one, it facilitates hunting because the dry weeds and fallen leaves not only hinder the hunter's progress, but the crackling invariably betrays him and the game spot him first. Second, it serves to thin out the forest as the fire smothers and kills much new undergrowth. Third, it clears the forest of old dead wood consisting of branches and fallen trees. And fourth, it increases the game and assists the hunter since it restricts the animal's movements and also enables them to be tracked in the burned areas. And then he goes on to write, this is a photo from the Hudson Highlands near Garrison, between Garrison and Cold Spring. There were pretty intense forest brush fires there about 3 summers ago. Such a fire is a spectacular sight when one sails on the rivers at night while the forest is ablaze on both banks. Fire and flames are seen everywhere on all sides. Much of the blaze is driven on by the wind and follows what it feeds on, but in many spots, dry wood and dead trees keep on burning. It is a delightful scene to look on from afar. Now, you can imagine how dramatic, this event must have been if you're sailing up the river in the 1600s at night, to see this going on. So, I'm gonna try to wrap this up, because I know we're carrying on here a little bit long, but, I just wanna talk a little bit about European, Dutch, English contact with the natives, how it changed their lifestyle, their way of life, how it affected their culture and their existence. So this is a reenactor named Drew Shuktar Ravis. He's a Pocomoke, descendants, so from the Maryland area, but really a scholar of really all Northeast natives, and he does first-person impressions and presentations. He came to Fort Montgomery, our historic site, back in the spring, and he talked about how when the Dutch showed up, one of the things the natives really glommed onto, what they really wanted, is this red duffel cloth. And if you think about it, if anybody's ever tried processing a deer hide, incredible amount of work to make that into usable leather. So you can get ready to go cloth that you can use, wrap around you. This is going to be a big boon to you. So this is actually some 18th century Pro red wool linen, red wool cloth that we'll pass around with it. Similar to the duffel cloth. It liked the color red initially, according to Drew, but then when they realized that they weren't as camouflaged in the woods, they quickly adopted other colors, so darker, more earth tones. I'm just going to read one first hand describing what the natives looked like to the Europeans. All right, I'm going to read you one that just to expedite this. Let's see. See if I can find this. All right, well, I'm going to read you a different account from the one I had in mind, but basically, this will still give you a similar sense. So this is an account from 1650 by David de Vries, a Dutchman involved with the Dutch West India Company. I will state something of the nations about Fort Amsterdam as the Hackensack, Tapans, Ramapo, and Wekwasikik Indians. These are embraced within 1, 2, 3, and 4 miles of the entrance to the river. Their clothing is a coat of beaver skins over the body with fur in winter, and outside in the summer. They have also sometimes a bear hide or a coat of skins of wildcats or raccoons. They also wear coats of turkey feathers, which they know how to put together. They make themselves shoes and stockings of deer skins, and they take the leaves of maize, corn husks, and braid them together, occasionally for shoes. So one thing that really struck me when I'm looking through a lot of these 17th century accounts, they talk about these coats of turkey feathers that the natives around here wore. And it's really pretty interesting. There's one account, this guy a Dutchman wrote in 1655, the feather mantles were to be found even at the present day among the Indians, and these in winter are better protection against the cold than the best European blanket. So even this duffel cloth didn't hold the candle, apparently, to these feather coats that apparently were very warm. And it makes sense, I guess, if you think about how bird feathers are hollow on the inside, and they have that trapped air, the air and heating it. Apparently they were popular among women wearing these fur. They would even have blankets made out of these turkey feather coats. Made out of turkey feathers. So I just want to run through quickly Dutch Wekwasikik relations. It would have been good. Initially, a lot of trade. Wekwasikik providing beaver fur, beaver pelts. These are being made to make the the hats that were all the rage at the time, the beaver felt hats, passed that around. The felt would have been made from the under fur, so there's the longer guard fur, and then the shorter fur, the under fur, that's where the felt is being made from, and it's felt hats. Trading, you can see the red duffel cloth, the musket, the beaver pelt. The natives providing tons and tons of these beaver skins to the Dutch giving them not just red duffel cloth, but metal tools, hatchets, firearms, kettles made out of brass. But the Dutch, things unfortunately sour pretty quickly when this guy, William Kieft, becomes director of the colony in New Amsterdam. Basically, is very aggressive. He demands tribute from the local natives. The natives rebuff him. A Wekwiskek boy had been traveling to New York City with his uncle about 10 or 15 years prior to the 1640s, and he was laid upon, I don't know if they were thieves or who they were, but they killed his uncle, and 15 years later, or 15 or 20 years later, he finally seeks to avenge his uncle's death, and this is one of the catalysts for Kieft's War, because this Wekwiskek youth or young man comes down to the city and he kills the man that killed his uncle, and then Kieft seizes upon this to just declare an all-out war on the Wekwiskek, the Wekwiskek, and the natives in basically the whole lower Hudson Valley area. And there are two very unfortunate incidents. There's a massacre in Pavonia, New Jersey, that happens in February 1643, where a number of the lower River Indians retreat to Pavonia, New Jersey, now Jersey City, to seek shelter from the Mohawk. So the Munsee, the lower river natives really have a long history of war with the Mohawk. They're really enemies, adversaries. They're driven into the Dutch colony. They think they may be able to seek shelter in Pavonia, but then Kieft seizes upon this opportunity to massacre the natives that have been trying to take refuge in Pavonia, New Jersey. And then almost a year later, almost a year exactly, there's another massacre that happens in Pound Ridge. That's the location of that, again, is up for debate, but in the Bedford area. And this is a terrible affair where some under Captain John Underhill, Dutch soldiers under the directive of Kieft land in Stamford on the coast of the Long Island Sound. They march about 10 or 15 miles inland. We know from a first-hand account there's a full moon, and according to some accounts, the natives may have even been gathered for their New Year's celebration, which apparently, according to a 17th century Dutch account, was the first full moon before the spring equinox. And there may have been a number of, not just Wekwiskek, but Brereton, Ramapo, Tappan, some other local tribes congregated there. And basically the Dutch set fire to their fortified castle. They had a wooden castle that they were in their winter quarters, and or at least for this ceremony. And instead of coming out and being shot down by the Dutch, the natives just stayed inside that palisade and were burned to death. They did not want to be shot down by the Dutch. And it's estimated that as many as 500 people, 500 of the natives may have been killed in that incident. That's modern, relatively modern rendition of Captain Underhill. This is an engraving of the Pequot Massacre, but I included it because it gives you a very similar representation of what happened at Pound Ridge. But the natives are inside this circular palisaded fort. See, they're just surrounded. If anybody comes out, they're going to be shot down by the Dutch. And Underhill was involved in that 1637 as well, not exactly what you call a nice job. So to wrap this all up, from what I can tell, the Muncie, the Wickers basically leave this area in the 1680s where they sell their final holdings in in the area of Frederick Phillips, manor lord that basically ends up moving almost a third of Westchester County. And they move west, but they kind of move in all different directions. Some head northeast to Scottsville, to the Saconic River Valley. Some join up with the Mohegans and the Wappinger and Stockbridge, and some head west into Pennsylvania, ending up in Ohio eventually. And it's really sort of kind of scattered by health. And there is some join up with the Moravians. These are missionaries from Protestant missionaries from the Czech Republic, we call Czech Republic today. And they actually live with the natives, and they don't try to change the natives' cultural practices, but what they do try to get them to do is convert to their brand of Christianity. So a lot of these are end up being called Christian Muncie. And Teresa actually has, Teresa Johnson, the woman we mentioned at the beginning, actually could trace some of her Muncie ancestry. Unfortunately, some of her ancestors happened in Ohio in 1782. But these were, the Christian Muncie were peaceful, pacifist natives that adopted Christianity, were under the destruction of the Moravians, and they tried to, it's a pretty sad story, they tried to keep evading these wars and attacks. Basically, when the Revolutionary War started, they were initially in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and then they moved west, trying to get away from the fighting, and then they end up getting attacked anyway, and a lot of them killed in Ohio, just in Ohio country. So Teresa, interestingly enough, has also some ancestors that go back to both sides of this conflict, in the sense that the reason why this settlement was attacked by American militia is because some Seneca Indians had attacked a homestead and killed the parents and taken a boy named Peter captive. And then as retribution for that, some of the American militia members attacked the non-Putin. But the unfortunate thing is the non-Putin community had nothing to do with that raid that was conducted by the Seneca. Just like these people will be stand-in for a generic Indian, so we'll seek our revenge. But ironically, Teresa is related to White Peter. He was the white boy that whose parents were killed by that Seneca raid, and his daughter, he ends up marrying a native woman. Their daughter ends up marrying a Lenape chief, and so Teresa has native heritage both on the Mohican side, some of the natives that were present that were massacred at Congreve, but also connections to what spurred the incident, which is related to this White Peter. So Teresa lives in Moravian Town, Moravian of the Thames Reserve, home of Muncie in Ontario. You can see it here, basically across from Cleveland, across Lake Erie. And some of her Muncie ancestry, according to her, does go right back to this area, to Wasik. Just want to end the tour by showing some of Fred Charles' great photos, because they, to me, they really bring the spirit of Wickers Creek alive. The natives that live here, the beauty of the Hudson River. I'm sure we all appreciate this site, and what the site looked like before it was developed, with the full moon rising in the east there. And it just, to me, it really captures the spirit of the place, as well as Larry Blizzard's artwork, which you should really check out. He's a focus member. His artwork that he has on display has been inspired by walking the grounds of Wickers Creek, and these are the visions and the impressions that came to him. And I think that that's very special and something that will help us get a better understanding of what life is like at this place. So I'm going to end it there, and thank you for your attention.
I need to do a picture of Peter with all of you behind. So Peter, just stand. So, that's a great. No, come closer. Yeah, that's great. You can applaud.
If anybody's still awake, you have questions, but if not, whoever's moderating between Dobbs Ferry Historical and Caucus, if you want to switch gears and get right to your meeting, I don't have to take questions. So I guess I'll take one.
I have a question about the trail. From that trail, you know, how that was decided on how to condition the trail.
No, are you talking about on the Mount Mercy campus?
No, it's actually a little bit south there.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure.
Over Wickers are being developed.
Yeah, some members of the Focus may know more about that. Yeah, all right. Yeah.
What do you think the population of Native Americans was at peak in this area?
And I mean, that's the area of a lot of speculation. I've seen a lot of different numbers, but you're saying before Europeans showed up?
Yeah.
I'd really be shooting from the hip, but I would think maybe the lower Hudson Valley, anywhere from like the entire lower Hudson Valley area, maybe 5,000 to 10,000, maybe 15,000. But that's a real guess. Yeah.
I would just like to thank the Historical Society and Focus for having this program today. And for people that do not realize this, Focus is an organization that has existed for 25 years. And people like Randy Quinstein, Mary Civic, Fred Charles, Peggy and Larry. I was just looking at the room, Peggy and Larry. I mean, they've been diehard and committed for over 25 years to this organization. And I really appreciate the fact that they still remain committed to the history of Wickers Creek and that they work so hard. I want to send some more money.
Great.
Okay, great.